This is the first part of notes for the age of absolutism, or the age of monarchs. So what is absolutism? Well, during the 1500s and 1600s, monarchs in Western Europe began to rule as if all power belonged to them alone. So they didn't have to listen to anyone else in order to do what they want. They could rule how they chose, even if that meant hurting some other people. So some characteristics of an absolute ruler is that they centralize power, okay, which means all power is in the monarch's hand and they form a centralized government. This means they have absolute control over everyone, including the peasants, the nobility, the government, the church, the military. Pretty much every single person in the entire country is under control of the absolute monarch. Now, they believed that their authority to rule came from God. And this is called the divine right of kings. And so God gives kings the power to rule, or God gives them the strength to be the person to have power. So people believe that if you challenge the king, you're challenging God. Okay, and since this was a very religious time period, they weren't going to challenge God, which means they're not going to challenge the king. That's going to change in one of our next units. Now, at this time, we're also forming what's called nation states. A nation state is the two bullets combined into one definition. So a nation is a large area in which people share a common culture, language, and religion. Okay, so in France, they have a nation because they all have a common culture and language, and they used to have a common religion of Catholicism, and now it's not so much. A state is a central government. Okay, now the question is whether the United States is actually a nation state or not. Some people say yes, some people say no. Think about it, pause the video, decide what you want. Depending on where you're from, you might see the US as a nation state, you might not. We do have multiple cultures within our country, so it's kind of hard to say that we are truly a nation state. We are many nations within a state. Here's our map of Europe at this time period in around the 1500s, 1600s. Okay, you can see the outline of the Holy Roman Empire in red. France is next door. What's called the Kingdom of Castile down at the bottom is going to be Spain. England is almost about to be unified with Scotland, and the Russian states are up in the upper left-hand corner. Now, we're going to look at several different monarchies. We're going to look at the Spanish Habsburgs, who control Spain, southern Italy, and the Netherlands, and that's going to be important. The Tudors and Stuarts control England. It'll be the Tudor family, and then their cousins, the Stuarts, take over. The Bourbon family controls France. The Hohenzollerns control Prussia, with a P, Prussia, and the Romanovs control Russia, with an R. So, last, we talked about the Protestant Reformation, where we are getting new Christian religions emerging. Now, we're going to see Catholics versus Protestants come back into play here. Spain is going to take the lead in the Catholic affairs. They're going to try and be 100% Catholic, whereas England is going to take the lead in all of the Protestant affairs. This means Spain and England are going to become huge rivals during this time period. So let's look at Spain first. In Spain, we have King Philip II. He is called the defender of the Catholic Church because he tries to expel all of the Jews and Muslims, okay, very similar to the Inquisition, keeping the Catholic Church pure in Spain. During his reign, we're also going to see the writing of Don Quixote, the first modern novel by Miguel Cervantes. Don Quixote is a story of an old gentleman who decides he wants to be a knight, and he goes out to fight giants and ogres and all of those crazy beasts, and actually ends up fighting a windmill. We watched a short clip of the Wishbone video. If you download the PowerPoint and click on the link, you should see that Wishbone becomes the sidekick of Don Quixote. Okay, during Philip's reign, Philip was actually married to Queen Mary I of England, who made England Catholic again. Okay, when she dies, her sister Elizabeth takes over and turns England back into being Protestant. And so Philip is really mad about this and decides to invade England. He also thinks he should have the throne of England, not Elizabeth. And so he invades England, and he sends his armada his navy up to England, and they are defeated. First by the English privateer named Sir Francis Drake, and then when you can see on the map, they're defeated from a couple battles right below England. They go up and they sail up and around to get back home, and they are hit by a couple shipwrecks. So the Armada does not work out. Why does this matter? Because when the Armada was blocking England, nobody was leaving England. But when the Armada is defeated, England can start trading again, which means England's looking for more colonies, which means it leads to the founding of the United States colonies, or the American colonies that become the United States, where we live today. So make sure you write something about that down in the Why Do We Care on your notes. This is part of learning how to take notes, making sure that you are listening, not just reading. Could be quizzed on what you have to listen to. So the Spanish Empire is going to weaken because of the whole Armada issue. We also see inflation weakening it because of the rise in prices from New World gold and silver. When you have an influx of gold and silver arriving in Spain, prices are going to rise, but salaries aren't, which means if you pay $5 for a loaf of bread and your salary is $5, you can get a loaf of bread a day. But if the price of a loaf of bread goes up to $15, you've got to wait 2 extra days in order to get a loaf of bread. So people are pretty hard hit. Today in the US, we have inflation, but it's like 1%, 2%. It's not a big deal. It's not like the 20 to 50% that Spain was seeing. They also have a lot of war debt from paying for those armadas that end up not working out. Okay, so Spain was very, very strong with their colonies, and they're starting to weaken now. Now in England, a funny thing happened in 1215. King John signed the Magna Carta, which is a document that you can see to the right, and this document limits the power of the king and says that the king has to consult Parliament in order to do anything. So this means future kings of England cannot be absolute rulers. They have to consult Parliament. Now it only takes about maybe 10 to 15% of their power away. We're using estimate rough numbers, but it still limits their power. France, Spain, other empires didn't have that. So England's going to be a little bit different. Now, we know that England is Spain's rival. They, in general, have a moderate version of Protestantism. They form the Church of England, or abbreviated C of E, also called the Anglican Church, and that's your parentheses. And they have a balance of power because of that Magna Carta. So the king has to work with Parliament. He can't just do what he wants. To our right is Mr. Henry VIII, and to the left is his daughter Elizabeth I, who becomes one of the longest reigning queens in English history. So, Henry VIII, we know he splits from the Catholic Church. We talked about that with the Protestant Reformation. He forms the Church of England. He's also going to appropriate land and money from the monasteries. So he's basically going to say, dear monasteries, you are no longer members of the Catholic Church. You are now mine, and I need the money to pay for a war, so get out. And I want to sell all of your buildings and sell all of your gold candlesticks so that I can pay for my wars. Okay, click on the link and watch the short video from Horrible Histories to see more about that. But so he's essentially gaining money from the monasteries, from the old monks. Elizabeth is going to return. Remember, after Henry dies, his son Edward takes over. Edward's not very strong. Then Mary comes along. Mary turns everything back to Catholicism. Mary's Philip II. It's a horrible time in English history. And then when she finally dies, Elizabeth I comes back in and returns everything to the Anglican Church. So we should probably put returns to Anglican Church. Now, she is going to build a very strong navy for the English country. Sorry, I'm adjusting this right now. She is going to have a victory over the Spanish Armada, so she's the one fighting Philip II. They're co-reigning at the same time. She is going to foster development of a strong commercial industry. So think about starting the triangular trade, and we're starting to get merchants. We're not just a country of farmers anymore. People are starting to have other jobs. And under her, we actually begin colonizing America with the Roanoke colony, which is off the coast of North Carolina. However, that colony fails. And it's not until her follower, James II, that we get the first successful colony. So Elizabeth dies in 1603 after a 60-year reign. She doesn't have any children, which leads to a problem. There's no one to follow her to the throne. So they turn to their cousins, who are the kings of Scotland, the Stuart family, and James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England. He is going to be followed by his son, Charles I, who's going to get in some trouble with Parliament, and we will see about that when we talk about the English Civil War. That's where we're going to pause. We will come back and do a second video for the next part of the notes.